It always bothers me. Every year during Holy Week, we read on the one hand about crowds of people who welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday with waving palm branches and shouts of Hosanna. And on the other hand, we read about the crowd screaming for his crucifixion on Friday. Were these two separate groups? The same crowd? A mixture of the two? There is, of course, no way to know for sure, but I think the gospel writers intentionally left us hanging on that question. So what do you suppose they wanted us to ponder? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, March 29th, 2024. I highly recommend that you read one of the gospel narratives of Holy Week, from Palm Sunday through the resurrection, all in one sitting. I think you'll be amazed at how much of each gospel is tied up in this 1 week. John, for example, devotes fully 10 of his 21 chapters to this week, and fully half of that on the Last Supper. The other Gospels also devote a great portion of their narratives about this 1 week. And because we read gospel texts in worship, often apart from the larger story in which they appear, you don't always realize that the stories we read in worship are part of this week. What I've tried to say this week is that many of these stories in this section serve in part to set up the conflict between Jesus and the religious authorities that resulted in his crucifixion. Perhaps they also serve to help us understand the reactions of the two crowds, the one on Palm Sunday and the other on Friday morning when Jesus was on trial. So with that in mind, here's a portion of the story as Mark tells it, of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. Now, at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now, a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish for me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Same crowd as Palm Sunday? Different crowd? A mix? My money is on a mix of the two crowds. I am certain there were those in Jerusalem that week who truly celebrated Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, but who were powerless to stop what happened on Friday. And I'm equally certain that there were those in Jerusalem that week who regarded Jesus with skepticism at best, and perhaps even with open hostility. But it's the rest of the crowd, the people who both cheered on Palm Sunday and jeered on Good Friday, that I worry about most. Because I think they're like us. Pushed and pulled by the ebb and flow of public opinion and willing to follow whatever the loudest voices said. We human beings are like that. Sure, there are a few among us who have the strength of convictions and will stand up and even be counted, even if they're a minority of one. But most of us don't want to be in that position. I know I don't. We're like Peter, who, during the nighttime hours before Jesus appeared in front of Pilate, denied knowing Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. It would have been people like this who would have both joined in the celebrations on Sunday and then turned around and joined in the shouts to release Barabbas and condemn Jesus on Friday. Jesus or Barabbas? It was more than a question of which one should be freed. It was a question of how a mob, even including people who had cheered just days before, could choose life for Barabbas and death for Jesus, the Prince of Peace. But that's the story of humankind. It's our story. I'm not so sure where I would have stood. I'd like to think I would have cheered on Sunday and loudly protested Jesus' condemnation on Friday. But if I'm honest, I would probably have stood by silent at best, and maybe even have joined in the shouts for Barabbas. And that's what the story is about, isn't it? For you see, Jesus didn't die for the stalwarts. He died for the fickle, the weak-kneed. In short, he died for me and for you. Tomorrow, a lonely Sabbath day. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.